Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan, and today I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up. March is already upon us, March 2018. It's when I'm making this video, so I don't know when you'll be watching it, but it is right now March the 1st, 2018 as I make this. And so I thought it was a good time for me to do my February wrap-up. I mean, that's original, right? Like nobody else is going to be doing this. But anyway, so I'm going to be looking at all the books that I completed in February 2018. And looking at my Goodreads, I've realized that I've actually completed 10 books. That doesn't mean that I necessarily read 10 books in February, because some of them I started in January or even before that, okay? So here they are in the order in which I finished them according to Goodreads. So the first book that I finished in February was Sleepwalking Land by Mia Couto. Mia Couto, it's a writer from Mozambique who writes in Portuguese. And in fact, I read this book in the original Portuguese. And in case you want to know, the original title for this book is Terra Sonâmbula, which literally means sleepwalking land. So in this case, they've just translated the title. I think the title works better in Portuguese than it does in English, but I don't know, what do you think? Anyway, this book is about civil war in a post-colonial African society, very much like the Mozambique that Mia Couto grew up in. And it has elements of magical realism. Now, that's something that might either put you off the book or make you want to read it. For me, it tends to put me off a book rather than me want to read it at this point. But I think the book's still worth reading because of how it deals with storytelling, and who tells the story, and I like the way the story of civil war and destruction is framed. So it's a very fascinating book. I feel like it's a book that I need to reread to get the most out of it. I don't think it's a book that you either have to read it a few times or read it very slowly, very closely, which I don't think I did. So that's why I didn't do a review for the book on my channel. But if I ever go back and read it again, I will probably be doing a review here. Okay, so that's Sleepwalking Land by Mia Couto. The second book that I finished was Because It Is Bitter and Because It Is My Heart by Joyce Carol Oates. And I shan't be saying a lot about this book because I actually did a review on my channel. So you'll find a link at the end of this video to it, and also down in the description. But also, if you go back to my channel's still new if you're watching this in March 2018. So you'll find it easier. There's also a playlist with all my reviews. But yeah, I have mixed feelings about this book, and if you want to know what they are, just go back. Having said that, I really want to read Joyce Carol Oates again, and I want to read more by her. And I have some books there on my TBR, but my TBR is always... my TBR lives in my mind, you know, and in scraps of paper and spreadsheets in my computer. But I rarely share it with people because I think the moment I talk about a book that I haven't read, then I kind of lose interest in the book. Anyway, that's another matter that I'll probably talk more about in future videos, or not. Anyway, third book I read, it's called Emma the Captive by Argentinian writer César Aira. Now, I read this in the original Spanish, but the title, once again, it's a literal translation. So in Spanish, the book is called Emma Cautiva, and in English it's called Emma the Captive. So it's the same thing. So we're in colonial Argentina, and we're dealing with the natives population, and we're dealing with the advance of the Spanish colonial troops who are through Argentina, through the land, basically, what then would become Argentina upon independence. It's a short book. I enjoyed César Aira's writing. He's a writer I only recently discovered, and last month, I mean in January, I read another one of his books called Embalse, which I talked about briefly on my wrap-up. And I'm fascinated by this writer. I still don't think I've read his best work, but if you have any suggestions about where I might want to go next after reading Embalse and Emma the Captive, just let me know down below in the comments, because I'd love to read more from by him. Okay, the next book I read was Paul Auster's The New York Trilogy. And again, I mean, it's an incredibly well-known novel. It's actually 3 novels, 3 stories, vaguely linked detective stories that are quite probably unsatisfactory as detective stories, but are a great experiment in postmodernist fiction. I made a review, so go watch it if you're interested in my thoughts on the New York Trilogy. Okay, the next book that I finished, it's Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin. Now, Samanta Schweblin is a very well-known Argentinian writer. She's only young and she's only published a handful of books, but she seems to have quite the following among young people, and I've heard a few YouTubers talk about her and her work, and mostly her most recent short story collection to come out in English, called Mouthful of Birds, I believe. But the novel that I read, Fever Dream, she wrote... Fever Dream came out before Mouthful of Birds in English, but it was written after in Spanish. And in fact, I read it in Spanish. And again, in case you're wondering, the title in Spanish is Distancia, rescate. This case, the title, both versions of the title couldn't be more different. In Spanish, Distancia de Rescate is called The Distance of a Rescue, or The Rescue in Distance, which is a phrase that she, Samanta Schweblin, coined for this book, which makes sense if you read the book. I guess Fever Dream could be read in 2 ways, or it could be read in many ways, I guess, like any other book. You know, texts are polysemic, but I think there are 2 main ways of approaching this book. You can approach it rather literally as a supernatural tale of a soul that goes into somebody else's body, or, you know, after the death of the first body that soul inhabited, or you can read it more metaphorically, and then read it in terms of grief, and or even in terms of like some form of literary game. And I know I'm not being very specific. If you watch this channel before, you probably know by now that I don't like to talk about plots a lot. So, you know, in this book, I don't think the plot really matters that much, other than all you need to know is what I've already said, I think. This is my first Samanta Schweblin book. I've been wanting to read this book and other books by her, but particularly this one, for a couple of years now, I think. And I'm glad I finally did, but I think I read it again too fast to fully get it. It's a short book, and short books can be so deceptive, because you think, oh great, I'll read this in one afternoon or in, you know, one sitting. And then when you finish, you're like, okay, I don't know what happened. I don't remember much about this book. And this is exactly how I react to this book, so I'll probably go back and read it again. And that's why I haven't done a full review, to be honest with you. Okay, next book I read was The Heart's Invisible Furies by Irish writer John Boyne. Now, John Boyne is a very popular writer, and this book is very popular, and there are a lot of booktubers who talk about his works, and this one and other more recent novels. I think he's put out 2 more novels after The Heart's Invisible Furies. And he's also famous for being the writer of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which was then made into a major movie. And that one, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, I believe it's more of a YA novel. This one definitely isn't, but it was my biggest disappointment so far this year. And again, I made a review with my thoughts on The Heart's Invisible Furies. If you want to know more about my opinion on this book, go check it out. There's also a very interesting, I think, discussion that I had down in the comments with Ollie Bliss, who has a great channel. And I really like his reviews, and he was pointing out to me why he liked the books. why he liked this book, and I think it's interesting how the same things, like he seemed to like the same things that I hated about the book, or that I hated the same things that he liked. And I think that's fascinating how readers can have such an opposite insight on a particular book. So go check it out and read the discussion and join in if you want to. Okay, the next book that I read in February, or that I finished, was In the Country of Last Things by Paul Auster. I was riding high on the wave that the New York trilogy had created. And yeah, this is a dystopian novel, and I did not enjoy that. I think as a dystopian novel, it was very... There's nothing memorable about it in ways that... It's not memorable in the ways that other dystopian novels like 1984, or even, you know, the ubiquitous now, The Handmaid's Tale, are. And so, yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it was very well written, of course, and I recommend it if you like dystopian novels, but it didn't really stick with me. I'm going to carry on with Paul Auster. I have a few books by him that I want to read. And again, if you have suggestions, let me know down below in the comments. Okay, the next book that I finished then was The Feast of the Goat. The Feast of the Goat by Peruvian author Mario Vargas Llosa. Again, I read this in the original Spanish, and the Spanish title is just, it's the same. It's La Fiesta del Chivo, so The Feast of the Goat is a literal translation. This is a fictional, yeah, it's a novelized account of the dictatorship of General Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. That's something, it's a period of history in a specific country that I knew very little about when I started reading Vargas Llosa's novel. I think it was great. It's probably the best account of a dictatorship that I have read. It has two different timelines, one during the dictatorship and one after, and they both intersect, or they're weaved through the narrative, which I thought it was a very smart choice. Yeah, when I was reading it, one thing that, even now thinking about it, one thing that strikes me about this novel is that it's not a dystopia. It's not a dystopian narrative, it's something that actually happened. And of course it's fiction, and I take it with a pinch of salt and so on, but wow, yeah, the things that, you know, tyrannical regimes could be capable of, and the people who lead them, and all the people who do not necessarily agree but go along with it, and then as soon as there's a tide change, they become for democracy and for freedom. It's amazing, and it's very real to life, and it has something in common with the history of my own country here in the Canary Islands. Nothing that I went through personally, because I'm, believe it or not, too young to have gone through that. But reading about it, the Dominican Republic and General Trujillo. And mostly, I mean, believe it or not, the book is not so much about Trujillo as it is about the people surrounding him, and also ordinary people like you and me. I'm assuming that none of my subscribers is an actual tyrannical ruler. So yeah, go read it. It's amazing. Yeah, that's The Feast of the Goat by Mario Vargas Llosa, the Nobel Prize winner for literature. And then I finished two more books, and these two books I finished yesterday, actually. So I was cutting it very thin. And those were Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. I mean, this is a very well-known book because it was made, well, in its own right, because it won the Pulitzer, but also because it was made into a miniseries on HBO. I watched the miniseries years ago, as soon as it came out, I think, and I watched it twice, and I loved it. And reading now the book, I realized that the miniseries had been very closely adapted, which I appreciated. Now thinking about it, I appreciate. There are some key differences, particularly in the character of Olive Kitteridge. Her personality, yeah, they got it down in the miniseries. Her physicality, not so much. And I don't want to say more about it because I hate to spoil people in books. You should read it. It's a novel, but it's told in vignettes. So you could read it almost like a short story collection, but it isn't. It kind of reminded me of some of the writing by Canadian author Alice Munro in that sense. In other aspects, it's very different. I thought it was quite unique. You get a lot of like the small town atmosphere, how people relate to each other, how ordinary events and not so ordinary events impacts us. I think the character of Olive Kitteridge is so appealing, even though she can come across as rude and even uncouth. I think she's so empathetic. I think she's so rich, you know, in personality, that I would really recommend this book. It's one of the best books I've read in a while. That's Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. And the final book that I read is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. Now, this is a book that I could talk and go on and on and on about it. And I don't know, I've been debating whether to actually make a review video of it or not. But I don't know, it's a very complex book. Toni Morrison is not an easy writer for me to write. First, because what she talks about, it's so alien to me. You know, namely the African-American experience in capital letters that can be quite daunting, because my background has nothing to do with that. And yet it's something that I think I know a lot about, but all my knowledge is mediated mostly through Hollywood. So, you know, all those miniseries like Roots and I know I'm going back, but it gets rerun regularly, or, you know, movies and so on. And so I'm always fascinated by Toni Morrison. The language she uses is so strange, and also she's difficult to read because sometimes she depicts stuff that it's really moving and really hard to read. And actually I read this book the day after I watched BlacKkKlansman by Spike Lee, which is a very different book, totally different book. But movie, it's a movie, not a book, BlacKkKlansman. And it made me so angry, you know, just to see the level of racism and how brutal and stupid racism really is. And so I was mentally in that place. That's probably what made me want to pick out Toni Morrison. And I know that I'm probably not making a lot of sense, and I'm not telling you anything about the plot of that book. It's powerful and it's haunting. And it doesn't really make me mad, or as mad as BlacKkKlansman made me. And it's totally different. I mean, there's nothing about, you know, the Ku Klux Klan in this book or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know, I'm still reeling from reading it, and I would recommend it. And I want to read Toni Morrison. I want to read more by Toni Morrison, and I want to mostly reread. And I think the next book that I'm going to reread by her, and I don't know when I'll get to it, could be this month, March 2018, it could be at some point later this year, but I want to reread Beloved, which I think many people would consider her masterpiece. And I read it back in college, which is going back a couple of decades now. And at the time, I just didn't get it. I struggled with it so much, and I really want to read it because I think Toni Morrison's books are really important. And if you have, you know, any thoughts on her books, or anything that you can say that it's more articulate and that shouldn't be difficult, then please let me know down in the comments. Anyway, I didn't want to end this in a sad note, and I don't know why I'm sad, because Toni Morrison's writing is great and it's full of life and it's so vivid. But yeah, here's my wrap-up for February 2018. Thanks for watching. Please let me know if you've read any of these books, if you have any suggestions for me based on what I've read and how I reacted to it, or just let me know what you've read in February 2018 down below in the comments. And so, thanks for watching, and I hope you join me again very soon. Goodbye.